Welcome to the top 5 mistakes people make mounting GoPros to helmets. All right, so there's a lot of mistakes on this stuff. I deal with footage on the Lone Star Drift channel constantly, and I must say, I am doing this video because I want all my drivers to watch this video. You get more airtime with us and everything on the Lone Star Drift channel if you provide us with your GoPro videos, but also you get to learn a lot faster if you have great GoPro footage of yourself. So I would really like you guys to learn how to do GoPro footage correctly. So first thing, the first biggest mistake is people mount their GoPros too high or too low. What that means is this GoPro should be mounted at eye level. I see people mount them down here, and then all it is just video straight of a steering wheel. You can't see over the dash. Everything's a disaster. That also leads the video to being blown out. I see them too high where you're looking at the roof and like you're looking down at everything and you can't see out in front of the car. The only comfortable way for the viewer to enjoy the video is if they see it through your own eyes. They need to be looking straight directly at your eyes. And you can really tell very quickly if it's not at eye line, and it makes the viewer very uncomfortable. So yeah, make sure the GoPro is directly at eye line. Also, depending on whether you're not in you're either a right-hand drive or left-hand drive vehicle, our drivers swap between them quite often. That's why I have a mount on both sides. You want the GoPro to be on the center of your car. You do not want it on the outside because then it just looks at the window pillar. Believe it or not, I see that a lot. So it needs to be mounted at eye level and on the inside of the car. I've seen even some drivers mount it at directly in front of their eyes, and that creates a very unique viewing perspective, but you literally have to mount it between your eyes, or you have to sit a little goofy so that the eye line is correct. So that was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is they expose poorly. The scene is either way too light or too dark, and GoPros don't have great dynamic range, which means your scene is gonna be completely blown out and it's all gonna be white and blown out, or it's gonna be too dark. So the reason a scene is blown out in exposure, under or overexposed, and it's just all white or all dark, is simply because your GoPro is exposing incorrectly, it's mounted too low or too high, or any of those combination of things. So there's little tiny spot exposure or full scene exposure. If you do a full scene exposure, and most of your car interior is black, it's going to be trying to see deep into those blacks, and it's gonna overexpose the image, lifting the image, trying to see directly into those blacks, and it's gonna blow out the highlights completely. And once the highlights are blown out, it makes things look really cheap and digital, and you just can't see outside the car. And who cares if you can see the carpets inside the car? That doesn't matter, or anything else inside the car. If you have a white car, like a white interior, typically it's kind of shady inside, and you'll notice like one of our drivers, Michael Van Schellenbeck, his footage is typically really well exposed because he's got a white interior in his car, and that pushes the exposure down and gets the exposure right for the outside. However, it shouldn't matter what color the interior of your car is or how light or dark it is. You should simply have your eye line correctly out the window, and you should always be looking out the window. And when you do, you have a spot exposure, which is the little dot in the settings, and it exposes just for that area in the very center of the image. And then that means that it's always properly exposed for anything you look at. That means even if your subject, you look down and you look at like the floor of your car, it will suddenly auto expose and get the bottom floor of your car. It'd be really cool. So you don't need, if you're just outside shooting and you're like mountain biking, you want the whole scene to be exposed. So you want not the little tiny spot, but you want the entire thing. But inside a race car, which is what we're talking about today, you want that little tiny spot exposure. Okay, number 3 biggest mistake I get from my drivers is excessive footage. And literally, you can't find a good lap or a good run or anything else in there. It's just a gigantic jumble of like an hour of them parked in grid. And then there's no real good footage in there because their card is always full, their battery's always dead. Something else is always destroyed because there's just too much junk footage. And then the driver doesn't want to go through it, I don't want to go through it, no one wants to go through it because there's literally 10 seconds of good footage per 1 hour of it sitting in grid. So don't be the dude that just presses record and then leaves the thing mounted to the outside of a car or something. That doesn't do anyone any good. Number 4 biggest mistake the batteries are always dead in GoPros. So let me show you something. There's two different types of GoPros we use. The full big ones, these have better image quality. They're bigger. I don't know how that's good, but they're better image quality. And then there's the little ones. Now the little GoPro Sessions, which these little tiny guys, these are really interesting and I love these and I get my best shots on these. Basically the biggest thing is battery life. There's other pluses, but battery life. And the reason why the battery life is so good on these is because you press once, it turns on and starts recording and does everything. You press it one more time, it stops recording and turns off. This, you have to go through 3 seconds of like turning it on and then record, stop recording, and then turn it off for 3 seconds. Now, this thing means that this camera is always sitting on and waiting for you to press record again because you don't want to just have to sit there every time you need it and turn it off and turn it on and wait and all that time. You want to focus on what you're doing and having fun and concentrating on whatever, cool sport you're doing or driving or whatever. But it means that this thing is going to be like on standby and sitting around a lot, which means it's going to nuke batteries. And the newer GoPros, we shred batteries in these like every 20 minutes or something like these. So these batteries are always dead in these things. They might come in and out, but you gotta take the case off. It's on your helmet, you're in a race car, it's a disaster. These things are always failing us. These things are garbage for use for us. These things are amazing. This has better image quality, but what does it matter if the camera's always dead? This thing always works. So if you're gonna do race car helmet stuff, I really, really like these. I hope the image quality gets a little bit better soon, but we get our best shots off the Sessions. Number 5, you should really shoot interesting stuff. People give me footage and it's just not interesting a lot of the time. You don't always know what you're gonna record or anything else, but you should really have interesting footage. You should shoot interesting things or maybe just not shoot. People don't want your garbage, boring footage. I shouldn't be mean about that or anything, but I'll dump that as maybe 4.5 and we'll do a whole nother one. So number 6 or 5 or however you want to say it is don't use 60p or any other like fast motion, slow motion stuff unless you actually need to slow something down. The reason why is because people give me 60p or 120p files all the time. And if we're just doing driving stuff, you do not need to slow motion that helmet cam footage down. You never need to. And what that means is if you have, say these things record, I don't remember, but maybe it's 25 or 60 megabits per second or something like that. If you have 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second, you get that exact same container size. If you do 120 frames a second, you get that exact same container size, which means each frame is gonna look way worse in the the slow motion footage, which is 120 frames per second. So typically the footage is gonna look way, way worse. And the file that we export and show to people is still gonna be 24, 30 frames a second. You're not gonna actually give people, full speed 120 frame per second content or anything. And that's not gonna make sense to non-camera people. But it just means just shoot it in 24 or 30 frames a second unless you absolutely know you're gonna have it in slow motion. Don't film stuff in slow motion like that. It really sucks because it cuts down the dynamic range and the image quality a lot, and it just isn't very good. Okay, so we've covered the basics of GoPro stuff. Basically, the biggest thing though is just have a GoPro session. Have a GoPro session which is super simple, mounted at eyeline, spot expose in the settings. If you don't spot it expose, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it really helps, and that's all you really need to know. Oh, and run it 24 or 30p. That's frames per second. I don't think there's anything else really to know. You can get really creative with these little guys. I'll insert some little tiny clips of some cool stuff we've done with suction cup mounts directly on top of a car. No gimbal or anything. These have excellent image stabilization in them. It cuts down the image quality a little bit, but it's really cool looking. There's no reason you can't go get absolutely fantastic, mind-blowing shots with these things and have epic, epic footage. You just have to do something cool, which is my problem. I don't know what to do, which is cool. Patrick, why don't you do more GoPro stuff?
I need to.
You need to? You do need to. I even gave you a GoPro.
I'm going to.
He's going to. Okay, thanks everybody. I hope all the drivers find that useful. I hope that they go mount their GoPros correctly. That's it. Bye.
What did we learn today? So shoot in 120 frames per second. Use old GoPros. Mount them right between your eyes.
Yep.
Brilliant.